You used to answer in under a minute. That was the deal, even if nobody ever said it out loud. Then one week you just didn't. No fight, no announcement. And the person who'd been setting the pace for months suddenly had no idea what to do with the quiet. They got used to you reacting, chasing after them, letting their emotional scraps be enough to keep you close. They never imagined that one day, without drama or warning, your rhythm would change completely. We live in an age where constant availability gets mistaken for love, where replying in seconds is read as devotion, and staying quiet is read as defeat. But what most people miss is that real psychological power doesn't shout. It asserts itself in silence. And when someone who's used to setting the pace feels that invisible crack forming, their entire emotional framework starts to shake. This isn't about loud revenge or cheap games. It's about strategy, about Stoicism applied to modern relationship psychology, about using strategic silence as a surgical tool to reverse power dynamics that have been in place for a long time. Because the person who only gave you scrap still doesn't understand that the space you leave behind is stronger than any speech. Over the next few minutes, you're going to step into territory most people never dare explore. This isn't surface-level tactics or empty motivational lines. This is real emotional control, conscious emotional detachment, firm boundaries, a magnetic presence that never has to beg for attention. This is about flipping roles, quiet psychological strategy, the invisible architecture that transforms relationships without a single word. This isn't common knowledge. You won't hear it in everyday conversations or the usual relationship advice. It's the kind of strategy history's great power players used, adapted for a hyper-digital world where a strategic disappearance hits harder than any direct confrontation. Before we go further, I want to ask you something directly. If this kind of content brings you clarity, if these ideas feel like they carry real value, you can support this work by tapping the thanks button below. It's not a favor. It's a way of strengthening this community and helping these ideas travel further. Every bit of support, big or small, is a quiet statement that says this matters. Because let's be honest, applying this strategy takes nerve. It takes discipline and a stoic mindset that most people don't have. It's not easy to break the pattern when every impulse in you is screaming to react. It's not simple to hold the silence that draws people in when everything inside you wants to explain. But the people who learn to do it, who master this with precision, don't just flip the game, they rise above it. The person who used to control the rhythm won't realize it right away, but little by little they'll feel the absence of your energy as a growing void. What used to be certainty becomes a question. What used to be control becomes insecurity. And what used to be scraps become the seed of that fixation they can't quite name yet. So stay until the end, because what you're about to hear isn't just another list of tips. It's a psychological playbook, Stoic edition, a clear map for changing your inner posture and shifting, without saying a word, the dynamic with anyone who ever thought they had you under control. Get ready. What starts here doesn't end the way it began. Picture a quiet scene. Two people, face to face. One sets the pace through small, subtle gestures. The other reacts without even realizing it. In that invisible choreography, a power dynamic is born. Whoever responds first hands over psychological control before a single word is spoken. We live in a loud era. Constant messages, urgency disguised as impulse, a desperate scramble for attention. But real psychological power doesn't belong to whoever raises their voice first. It belongs to whoever can hold still while everyone else scrambles to fill the gap. In relationship psychology, Stoic silence isn't passivity. It's a tactic that shifts the ground without warning. When you stop your automatic reactions, you break the emotional sequence the other person took for granted. You stop being a piece on the board and become the one moving the pieces. Most people never notice this invisible game. They reply instantly, over-explain, fill every gap with words, chasing approval. Without realizing it, they're reinforcing the other person's control. Every impulsive message, every justification is a quiet surrender. And that pattern, repeated enough times, becomes a cage. Stoicism teaches that the first territory worth conquering is the internal one. Self-control isn't glamorous, it's real dominance. In a world where everyone reacts, the person who stays calm and disappears strategically becomes unpredictable. Their magnetic presence doesn't need noise to have influence. Think about the role reversal here. The one who used to chase now watches quietly. The one who used to set the pace starts to feel that powerful absence, like an echo that throws them off balance. This break in the pattern is subtle but devastating. The silence that draws people in works like a psychological mirror. When you disappear strategically, the other person is left facing a void they don't know how to fill. What they used to ignore starts to weigh on them. Their thoughts start looping. A fixation they can't quite name yet takes hold, not because of what you say, but because of what you're no longer giving. Uncertainty is a slow poison. In this first phase, there's no open confrontation, no dramatic speeches, just tactics, just firm boundaries set without announcement. A Stoic mindset doesn't show up in grand words, it shows up in calculated self-restraint. Every silence becomes an exact move on the emotional chessboard. Emotional detachment doesn't mean total indifference. It means a conscious choice. It's not running away, it's a silent strategy applied with surgical precision. This mental position transforms relationship psychology. You're no longer trying to be understood. You're the one who decides when, how, and if you respond. That choice is power. A lot of people believe reacting quickly keeps them in control, when really it hands control away. Every instant reply is like opening a door the other person was already expecting you to walk through. But when you choose not to, you introduce emotional dominance without saying a word. You're the one setting the tempo. This first move looks simple, but it's the root of every deep personal transformation. Controlling the impulse to react is controlling the foundation of the whole game. This is where the real shift in power begins, and the people who master this first step open the door to something much bigger. When someone gets used to setting the pace, they don't need to say it out loud. They watch your response times, measure your availability, study your reactions. Every move you make is intel to them. They're not searching for your heart, they're testing your limits. It's a quiet exam disguised as connection. Most people romanticize this dynamic and call it chemistry or fate, but underneath it's pure relationship psychology. One person leads, the other follows. One offers scraps, the other clings to them. That's how a control game is born, one where psychological power tilts toward whoever sets the emotional tempo. Strategic silence interrupts this invisible system. When you stop reacting, you introduce an error into the script the other person thought they controlled. It's like one figure in a perfectly choreographed dance, suddenly standing still. The whole scene falls apart. Certainty gets replaced by uncertainty. Stoicism teaches you to observe without stepping in. When you apply a Stoic mindset, you stop dancing to someone else's rhythm. Your self-control isn't emotional rebellion. It's a mirror that exposes the hidden game. The other person no longer sees automatic responses. They see a calculated void that throws them off. Picture a lab experiment. Every instant message, every explanation, every "are you okay?" is a data point the other person logs as a constant. When you break that constant, the tactic shifts hands. You're no longer the one being studied. You become the puzzle they can't solve. This role reversal creates a new kind of tension. Magnetic presence doesn't come from shouting your worth, it comes from quietly withdrawing it. A quiet withdrawal isn't a whim, it's a break in the pattern that used to keep the power dynamic stable, and that crack grows fast. What's fascinating is that this test often isn't even conscious. The other person is probing your emotional detachment without realizing it. Every bit of silence that draws them in triggers a thought in their mind. Why aren't they reacting the way they used to? That quiet question is where a fixation they can't quite name yet starts to take shape. It's not that they didn't see your worth before. It's that they took it for granted. When you cut off the constant emotional supply, you force them to face their own dependency. Their self-image starts cracking at the edges right there, in the sudden realization that the control they thought they had was only ever borrowed. Quiet respect isn't demanded, it's provoked. The tactic isn't confrontation, it's making the hidden game visible through complete emotional control. It's the first real hit, not on the surface of the relationship, but at its psychological foundation. And right when this ground starts to shake, the most common trap shows up, one impulsive reaction that ruins everything. But whoever understands this stage knows the next step demands even more precision. The real battle hasn't even started yet. Right now you react before you think. No structure, no pause, just the same pattern repeating every time someone pulls at you. The Power of Not Reacting is a practical digital ebook built to give you that structure. Subscribers get a special discount on it right now. The link is in the first pinned comment. The discount is only active for a limited time. This is where most people fail without even noticing. Faced with someone else's silence, they feel anxious and rush to fill the gap. A quick message, a long explanation, "I just wanted to check in," and in seconds they hand back the control they'd started to reclaim. Impulsiveness is what betrays them. This mistake looks small, but it's structural. Every automatic reaction reinforces the old power dynamic. The other person learns that all it takes is pulling back their attention to get you running after them again. That's how the control game locks in. One person creates uncertainty, the other dissolves it. One leads, the other follows. Underneath it, this impulsive reply works like a conditioned reflex. You were trained, without a single word, to react to their calculated absence. Every instant reply confirms that your emotional detachment is fragile, that your self-restraint is only temporary. And they notice, even if they never say it. A Stoic silence isn't held together by speeches, it's built through deliberate practice. Applied Stoicism here is cold discipline. Wait, observe, resist the urge. Every minute you don't give in to the other person's tactic is a silent declaration of psychological power. You say nothing, but everything shifts. Think about it this way. If you always answer in seconds, you're completely predictable. You become an open book, boring, easy to control. When you delay, when you choose when and how to respond, you introduce strategic silence that reorders the power dynamic without a single word. Most people confuse emotional control with repression, but self-control isn't refusing to feel. It's choosing from a Stoic mindset. It's drawing firm internal boundaries that stop your behavior from dancing to someone else's emotional manipulation. That's where real personal transformation begins. When you break this pattern, something interesting happens. The other person, used to seeing you react, suddenly faces an unexpected mirror. They're no longer setting the pace. Their self-image starts cracking at the edges. But this is only the first phase. Most people lose it here by failing to hold their ground, because the urge to get back to normal is strong. You want to write, to explain, to reopen contact, but every hasty move kills the effect of the silence that draws people in. Measured distance doesn't work if you break it halfway through. The strength is in not reacting when it hurts the most. This is the classic mistake. Thinking one small exception won't change anything. But in the control game, a single misstep reveals your whole emotional map. And once that happens, the role reversal collapses before it ever takes hold. Whoever understands this hidden rule doesn't rush. They understand that silence isn't absence, it's structure, that the void isn't weakness, it's a stage where the other person's mind starts spinning on itself. And what happens on that stage is only the beginning. And right here, a quiet promise starts to take shape, one that changes the entire psychological board. If you manage to master your impulse and hold strategic silence without breaking, the emotional ground reorganizes in your favor. What used to be reaction becomes posture. What used to be chasing becomes calculated observation. You're no longer dancing to anyone's rhythm. You're setting the tempo from your own stillness. The silence strategy isn't about hurting or punishing. It's about shifting the internal tempo of the relationship. It's like pulling a key piece out of a perfect mechanism. At first, nothing seems to change, but little by little, the gears start to jam. The other person, used to your instant availability, starts to feel an invisible crack spreading under their feet. The security they had starts to crumble, quietly, without a scene. That crack matters more than it looks. Up until now, psychological power sat in their hands because they controlled your impulse. They knew that with a little silence, a small strategic disappearance, they could trigger your instant reaction. But now, that reaction never comes. What they find instead is a wall of stoic calm, a firm stoic mindset that doesn't bend to the control game. This shift throws them off completely, because you're not playing on the same emotional field anymore. You're playing an entirely different game. A deliberate pulling back, applied with real internal consistency, works like a mirror that reflects every tactic back at them. Suddenly, the person who used to set the rhythm has to improvise. Controlled calm isn't passivity, it's quiet action. It's inner strength working without ever raising its voice. Every minute you hold that posture without reacting, plants are growing doubt in their mind. What changed? Why aren't they responding the way they used to? Did I lose control? That string of questions doesn't need you to say anything. The void generates them on its own. Stoicism gives you strategic patience that most people don't have. You know this isn't about quick replies or instant effects. The silent strategy is like a seed planted deep underground. You can't see it, but it's growing quietly. Day after day, that unspoken pull toward you keeps building, not because of your words, but because of your absence. The real promise isn't that they'll come running back right away. It's that the balance of the dynamic shifts without any confrontation. Your self-control, your emotional detachment, your firm boundaries, all of it works like an underground current, reshaping the river's direction, one nobody can stop. You can picture this in practice. Before you replied in seconds, over-explained yourself, offered constant validation. Now your replies come hours later, or they don't come at all. Your words are short, measured, plain. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're not throwing out emotional bait. You simply exist in stoic silence. And that, ironically, speaks louder than any speech. This shift brings emotional dominance without any drama. No big scenes, no endless back and forth, just an invisible turn. The role reversal. The person who used to feel like the center of the dynamic starts to feel your controlled stillness, like an echo bouncing off their own insecurities. What they used to ignore about you now feels intriguing. What they used to take for granted now feels out of reach. That creeping preoccupation doesn't come from grand romantic gestures. It comes from the sudden loss of control. That feeling of not knowing what's going on is what sets their thoughts spinning. They go back through old messages, watch your activity online, study every bit of silence like it's a code they need to crack. And the more they look for signs, the fewer they find. Here's the most powerful part of this whole strategy. You don't need loud confrontations or endless explanations, just internal consistency and an unshakable posture. Nobody hands over that kind of respect voluntarily. It builds up on its own, the longer you stay steady. The shift in power doesn't come with applause. It arrives quietly, like nightfall settling in without resistance. But this phase also comes with a test. Once the other person notices the change, they'll test your consistency. They'll send subtle signals, casual messages, small attempts to bring back the old rhythm. They'll expect you to react the way you used to. If you give in, the whole thing falls apart. But if you hold your ground, the role reversal stops being a possibility and becomes a settled reality. This moment doesn't come with fanfare. It's invisible to the outside world, but internally it's a quiet earthquake. You've changed the logic of the control game without shouting, without demanding, without begging. You've shown that real psychological power doesn't need approval. It's built on the silent strategy, a stoic mindset, and the ability to stay still when everyone expects you to move. And right as that current starts pulling them along without their control, the next phase opens up. A stage where holding silence isn't enough anymore. You have to learn to hold your structure without cracking when the other person starts reacting with nerves, provocation, or nostalgia. That's where real mastery gets tested. Theory without practice fades fast. This is where the strategy stops being an idea and turns into something real. Power dynamics don't shift through speeches. They shift through sustained action. That's why this part matters so much, showing how strategic silence plays out in real life step by step until it dismantles the control game entirely. Picture someone who always replied in seconds. Predictable, available, easy to read. One day, without warning, the rhythm changes. No dramatic disappearing act, just quiet stoic silence settling in. Day 1. The other person doesn't react. Day 3. They notice the gap. Day 7. A preoccupation with you they can't shake is already taking root. What used to be habit is now a question mark. Another example, someone who used to engage with every post, send little digital signals, feed the relationship with small daily gestures of attention. Then, suddenly, nothing. No likes, no comments, no trace. 2 weeks later, the other person starts throwing out bait. Posts designed to provoke, casual messages, small feelers, but the deliberate pulling back, stays intact. Someone mentions almost in passing that your name came up in a conversation you weren't part of. You hear about it secondhand, days later, and there's a version of you that would have turned that into a whole investigation. Instead, you just note it, the way you'd note the weather and go back to what you were doing. In both cases, what's really at work isn't physical absence, it's an invisible tactic. The other person's mind, used to a fixed pattern, starts looping. They search for explanations, invent stories, replay old interactions. Uncertainty settles in like a quiet current. Every minute without a reply is one more drop in a glass that fills slowly, but never stops. This process isn't instant. Real Stoicism understands that deep change takes calculated patience. The silent strategy isn't about manipulating surface emotions, it's about dismantling internal structures, expectations, emotional routines, inflated egos. And for that, consistency is the sharpest tool you have. When you hold this posture without breaking, quiet respect starts to show up naturally. They no longer need explanations to feel your worth. They feel it in the steadiness of your absence, in the clarity of your boundaries, in your unshakable emotional control. The role reversal isn't theoretical anymore. It's happening right in front of them, and there's nothing they can do about it. What's fascinating is how the whole atmosphere shifts. At first, there's indifference, then a faint "I miss having them around." Later, unease creeps in. They check messages, imagine scenarios, feel the pattern breaking. Eventually, emotional dominance changes hands entirely. What used to feel like security for them becomes uncertain ground. These small moments aren't the exception. They're the norm once you apply the silence strategy with real precision. You don't need big gestures to trigger a collapse in their self-image. All it takes is pulling back the emotional fuel you used to give away for free. What used to be invisible becomes the center of their attention. Every day you hold that quiet withdrawal without breaking, the shift goes deeper. Your magnetic presence no longer comes from what you say, but from what you no longer give. Your Stoic mindset isn't performance. It's internal steadiness working like a quiet gravitational pull. And this is exactly where real personal transformation starts to take shape. Because what's set in motion here isn't just their reaction. It's a reflection of your new posture. And that posture, once it holds, produces effects most people never see coming. Somewhere in this stretch, the real Stoic shift kicks in. Silence stops being a temporary absence and becomes a way of life. It's no longer a tool to provoke a reaction, it's a structure that redefines relationship psychology. A Stoic mindset steps in like an invisible wall holding every move steady. Most people read silence as emptiness, but in the hands of someone who's mastered emotional control, it becomes a precision weapon. You don't explain, you don't justify, you don't chase approval. You practice self-restraint, hold firm boundaries, and use calculated absence as a clear signal. You're no longer available for control games. Stoicism treats authority as something you earn by staying steady, not by demanding it. That radical calm projects quiet respect, an inner strength people feel even without a word being said. Magnetic presence shows up precisely because you stop responding the way you used to. Your unpredictability creates curiosity, insecurity, and attraction. This is where their sense of control starts caving in. They used to have your rhythm under control. Now they run into a wall that won't move. Stoic silence reflects their own gaps back at them. What used to feel comfortable now feels threatening. That fixation takes hold the second they realize your energy no longer flows for free. The role reversal becomes obvious. You who used to be predictable become the unknown variable. They who seem to be the one in control start reacting with nerves. Quiet respect isn't a negotiation. It's the inevitable result of holding your self-control and emotional detachment with consistency. The most powerful part is that this shift doesn't rely on speeches or confrontations. It depends only on you, on your discipline in applying the silence strategy, on your ability to stay calm when everything inside you wants to break it. That consistency is what changes the power dynamic at its root. The silence that pulls people in was never empty. It's the frame holding up everything you're becoming. And whoever reaches this level understands that the real battle was never with the other person, it was with their own impulses. Winning that internal war is what makes you untouchable. But holding this posture comes with a consequence. The other person won't stay passive. They'll react, test you, look for cracks in your foundation. And it's in that reaction where the control game finally starts to collapse for good. You've probably already caught yourself mid-reaction more than once and just talked yourself out of finishing it. That's not nothing, but it's not consistent either. And inconsistency is exactly where the old pattern sneaks back in. The power of not reacting lays out what to actually do in that half-second window, not as a mindset, as a sequence you can repeat. Subscribers get 37% off right now. The link is in the first pinned comment, and this one closes soon. Strategy without execution fades away. From here on, posture has to turn into daily practice. Understanding the dynamic isn't enough. You have to master it with real precision. Every action counts. Every silence you hold strengthens your position. Every impulsive reaction destroys it. This is the stage where your real quiet authority gets built. First step, control your response time. You used to reply in seconds. Now you decide when and if to respond. This isn't a game, it's real emotional control. Every hour you wait breaks the dependency pattern that used to fuel the control game. The uncertainty that used to control you now starts working in your favor. Second step, say less. Don't explain, don't justify, don't decorate your words. Short, neutral, deliberate replies. A simple "we'll see" carries more psychological weight than a paragraph of justification. By limiting your words, you introduce strategic silence into every exchange, building ground that you control. Third step, control the information. You used to share every detail of your life without filtering. Now you share the bare minimum only when you choose to. This calculated opacity disarms emotional manipulation because they can no longer predict your moves. A Stoic mindset shows up in every deliberate omission. Fourth step, pull back your digital signals. No harmless likes, no disguised comments, no covert glances. The strategic disappearance is total. If you stay half present, you cancel the whole effect. By cutting off feedback completely, you trigger the silence that draws people in and activate that fixation they can't quite name yet. Fifth step, don't test the waters. The classic mistake is throwing out little hooks just to see if you still matter to them. Every one of those moves cracks your posture. Real inner strength shows up when you don't need signals to know your own worth. That's Stoicism in action. Sixth step, set firm internal boundaries. Silence can't be an empty performance, it has to come from real conviction. If you use it to manipulate, it falls apart. If it comes from genuine self-control and emotional detachment, it becomes an unbreakable tactic. The difference lives in your center, not in your words. Seventh step, hold the posture with discipline. The first few days will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will want to slip back into old patterns, but every impulse you resist is a brick in the structure of your personal transformation. This is the point where the game stops revolving around them and starts revolving around you. When you apply this strategy with precision, the power dynamic shifts permanently. You don't announce it, you don't explain it, you simply act. And the other person, little by little, is forced to adapt to your new rhythm or fall off the board entirely. That's the quiet victory very few people manage to hold on to. And right as this internal structure locks into place, it's time to look past the tactic itself and understand how this posture reshapes not just your relationships, but your entire identity. Silence was never the trick here. Distance was just what it looked like from outside. What actually happened is smaller and harder to name. You simply stopped performing for someone who was never really watching. At first it looked like a small shift, replying less, disappearing calmly, watching instead of stepping in. But what started as a subtle decision turned into an overwhelming psychological force. The person who used to read you like an open book now faces a puzzle they can't solve. What used to feel like control over you has dissolved into their own echo. Look back for a moment. Remember how you used to react at the first sign of distance. Instant messages, long explanations, desperate attempts to keep a one-sided connection alive. That's gone now. Today, your emotional control has rewritten the story. Your quiet withdrawal wasn't running away, it was a quiet repositioning that changed the dynamic from the ground up. The most devastating psychological power never needs to shout. You feel it in the steadiness of your magnetic presence, in the security of your firm boundaries, in the stoic mindset guiding every move. You no longer beg for attention. You no longer chase scraps. You're the one setting the pace without moving an inch. And they feel it. What they used to take for granted now sits on them like a heavy absence. What they used to ignore now feels irresistible. That fixation grows in their mind, not because of what you say, but because of what you've stopped giving. Every day you hold this posture, the control game collapses a little more. This is the real closing of the cycle, when you no longer need explanations, validation, or payback. Your silent strategy was never about punishment, it was about freedom. Because the personal transformation you started doesn't depend on whether they come back. It depends on you never going back to who you used to be. By now the role reversal has already completed itself. You no longer revolve around anyone. It's everyone else who feels the pull of your new posture, your self-restraint, your emotional detachment, your quiet discipline. All of it sends a message that needs no translation. I'm not playing on your board anymore. If you want in, it's on mine now. And that shift isn't explained. It's felt. You sense it in every interaction, every calculated non-reply, every calm look that doesn't need to prove anything. That's the essence of a Stoic mindset, not depending on the outside world to hold your center. You've gone from reaction to structure. If this video opened your eyes, if it resonated with you, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this with anyone who still doesn't understand the power of silence. Because what you're applying isn't a trend, it's a different way of living your relationships, and once you master it, you never go back. And if you want to help this message reach more people, you can support this project directly. Tap the thanks button below to contribute. It's not charity, it's a strategic partnership. Together, we get this message to the people who need to reclaim their center. Every bit of support keeps this independent voice going, one that doesn't bend to the noise. What started as silence became an unshakable position. And the irony is, without saying a word, you said everything. You broke the pattern, flipped the dynamic, built quiet respect, and freed your own psychological power. The person who only gave you scraps will end up fixated on you. Not because you planned it, but because your new posture exposes their own emptiness. And you, meanwhile, keep moving forward calmly, certain that your energy is no longer given away. It's earned. This is the end of the video, but not the end of your transformation. What you do with this knowledge is what will make the difference. Some people will listen and stay exactly the same. Others, like you, will apply every step with precision and watch the world around them reshape itself without resistance. Next time it happens, you probably won't even decide to stay quiet. You'll just notice a few days in that you never got around to answering, and that it doesn't bother you the way it used to. Without a fixed structure, you go back to the same pattern. You react, you regret it, and the cycle resets. That's the real failure here, not weak willpower, a missing framework for the exact moment tension hits. Handling that moment is exactly what the power of not reacting was written for. A practical digital ebook on holding your response, setting the pause, and applying this without relying on willpower alone. There's a special discount for subscribers right now, and it won't stay open long. The link is in the first pinned comment.